1950s, mainframes were as big as this garage, and that's because they were filled with thousands of these vacuum tubes or valves. Eventually, the valves were made much smaller and replaced with transistors. Still too big, however, to make a computer that could fit on your desk. What that took was further miniaturization. Here we have a single piece of silicon etched with thousands of transistors. This microprocessor holds more than 1 million transistors, and that's the secret of the personal computer. And that's why they call it Silicon Valley, not Computer Valley.
These are the people who invented the microprocessor, Intel. Intel was started 28 years ago by a handful of guys after a row with their old boss. Their microprocessors today power 85% of the world's computers.
Our test table?
Intel not only invented the chip, they are responsible for the laid-back Silicon Valley working style. Everyone was on a first-name basis. There were no reserved parking places, no offices, only cubicles. It's still true today. Here's the chairman's cubicle.
Knock, knock. Yeah, I've knocked on the door, but there's no door.
Gordon Moore is one of the Intel founders, worth $3 billion. With money like that, I'd have a door.
In a business like this, the people with the power are the ones that have the understanding of what's going on, not necessarily the ones on top. It's very important that those people that have the knowledge are the ones that make the decisions. So we set up something where everyone who had the knowledge had an equal say in what was going on.
Intel's microprocessors kept getting more powerful. They soon had enough horsepower to run a whole computer. Only Intel didn't appreciate the brilliance of their own product, seeing it as useful mainly for calculators or traffic lights. Intel had all the elements necessary to invent the PC business, but they just didn't get it. Lucky for us, someone did. This is the chip that launched the personal computer revolution. This is the magazine that announced it. In January 1975, featured on the cover was the world's first personal computer, the Altair 8800. It was the crazy idea of an ex-Air Force officer from Georgia, Ed Roberts.
If you look at it, it was kind of a grandiose, almost megalomaniac kind of scheme, And right now I couldn't do it because I could see right off there's no way you could do this. There isn't any way you could do this. But at that time, we just lacked the benefits of age and experience. We didn't know we couldn't do it.
20 years after Ed Roberts' flash of brilliance, this exhibit is being held to celebrate the anniversary of the Altair. Like every other PC pioneer, Ed built his computer just because he wanted one to play with.
There were some of us that lusted after computers, really, at that time. All the computers in the world tended to be in big centers, and you had to get permission to get close to them, and it was, nobody had access to computers then. And the idea that you could have your own computer and do whatever you wanted to with it whenever you wanted to was fantastic.
And where was all this happening? It was far from Silicon Valley, Intel, or IBM. Out in the desert near the airport in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Ed Roberts ran a calculator company called MITS. Having an ugly building wasn't its only problem. MITS was going bankrupt. Nobody was buying calculators, and Ed needed $65,000 just to stay afloat.
We went to the bank and had a late-night meeting, and the issue was whether we closed MITS down or they loaned us an additional $65,000. And I was asked how many machines that I think we would sell in the next year after it was introduced. And I said 800, and was considered a wild-eyed optimist at that. Within a month after it was introduced, we were getting 250 orders a day. Started about 6.
The Altair wasn't even a computer. It was a computer kit.
Whoa, this is a pretty well-equipped machine.
You had to build it yourself, and even then it usually didn't work. Still, the demand was amazing.
And there were actually people that came to MITS, a couple people with camper trailers, and camped out in the parking lot waiting for their machine. I mean, they were so eager.
I think everybody had sort of daydreamed, or Walter Mitty, about owning a computer. The surprise was that it would be possible for the average college student, for example, who was living on bare subsistence, to actually buy a computer.
This is what really amazed me, was that people were there was a sort of a pent-up demand for having your own computer.
And if it could be that cheap, what a wonderful thing.
This is an Altair computer, the first personal computer. And not just any Altair. This is Altair serial number 2, the second one made. The first Altair made was sent off to be photographed at a magazine and was lost in the mail. So this is the oldest personal computer in the world. Pretty historic junk, but the question is, what do you do with it? I mean, it has a front panel with switches that you can click back and forth and some lights, but in the back, there's no place to connect a keyboard, there's no place to connect a monitor, there's no place to connect a printer. In fact, there's practically nothing at all that you can really do with this thing. But back then, 1975, the people who had it were thrilled.
The nerds formed clubs to talk about their new toy. One of the first was the Homebrew Computer Club, which met on Wednesday evenings in a hall rented from Stanford University in Silicon Valley. Presiding over near anarchy was Lee Felsenstein, who pretended to be in charge.
I would start the meeting by making a horrendous loud noise because everyone was talking and I had to get some attention somehow. And I would use it to call on the person in question. I'd make threatening gestures with it. Most of us were in the electronics industry to a certain extent. There was also a stratum of physicians. And there were a lot of radio amateurs, for instance, finding a new technology that wasn't stale. But most of us were at a sort of middle level downwards. We saw ourselves as crazed, ignored geniuses, or possibly geniuses, but at least we could each hope to get our hands on a computer of our own.
Not much in them.
The very uselessness of the Altair is what drove the hobbyists together. Roger Mellon and Harry Garland started an early computer company. They came here to meet others and to figure out just what the heck could be done with this new toy. A solution in search of a problem.
There's no keyboard that I can see.
The Altair was tedious to use. At first, the only way that data and instructions could be given to the computer was by flipping switches. Take something trivial like 2 + 2. Each 2 needed 8 different switches to be flipped, then a 9th switch was used to load them all. Add required another 9 switches. The answer 4 was if the third light from the left turned on. Eureka!
So if you had a program that was 100 bytes long, you had to go through this procedure 100 times to load that into memory.
It took a long time.
I bet it did. And what happened if you lost power or you lost your way in the middle?
You cried.
The Altair may have been frustrating, but it drove the nerds to experiment, finding real uses for the useless box, turning it from a curiosity to a computer.
Steve Dompier set up an Altair, laboriously keyed a program into it. Somebody knocked the plug out of the wall, and he had to do that all over again, but nobody knew what this was about. After all, was it just going to sit and flash its lights? No.
You put a little transistor radio next to the Altair, and he would, by manipulating the length of loops in the software, could play tunes.
The radio began playing The Fool on the Hill. Da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, in the tinny little tunes that you could tell were coming from the noise that the computer was generated, being picked up by the radio. Everybody rose and applauded. I proposed that he receive the Stripped Phillips Screw Award for finding a use for something previously thought useless. But I think everyone was too busy applauding to even hear me.
It was a very exciting thing. It was probably the first thing the Altair actually did.
Turning the Altair into a useful tool required a programming language so users could type their programs in rather than flipping switches. What it needed was a version of some big computer language like BASIC, only modified for the PC. This was called a BASIC interpreter, but it didn't yet exist because the experts all thought that not even BASIC was basic enough to fit inside the tiny Altair memory. Yet again, the experts were wrong. Here comes the guy who solved the problem. 20 years after finishing the first microcomputer BASIC, Paul Allen is returning to Albuquerque for a celebration of that event, this time with his $15 million jet and 3-foot red carpet. At a time when I was killing brain cells, this guy was founding an empire. He has come to eat rubber chicken in honor of the Altair's 20th anniversary.
I'd like to introduce to you Paul Allen.
Allen co-founded Microsoft with his younger buddy from high school, Bill Gates.
One day in Boston, I was in Harvard Square, and I covered Popular Electronics with this thing that looked like what I'd been imagining. And so I grabbed it off the shelf, and I looked at it, and I bought it, and I ran back to Bill's dorm, and I think he was probably playing poker that night and usually losing money at that point. One of the few times when that's been the case.
Paul showed that to me. Then, okay, here was a company that would be needing software.
And he said, okay, well, we got to call these guys up and see if this thing is for real.
We realized that things were starting to happen, and just because we'd had a vision for a long time of where this chip could go, what it could mean, that didn't mean the industry was going to wait for us while I stayed and finished my degree at Harvard.
So called up Ed, we told him we've got this BASIC, and it's just, for your machine, and it's not that far from being done, and we'd like to come out and show it to you.
So we created this BASIC interpreter. Paul took the paper tape and flew out. In fact, the night before, he got some sleep while I double-checked everything to make sure that we had it all right.
But I had no idea what it was really going to be like to try to run the software. It had never been run on an actual computer before.
He was very nervous about whether this would actually work, and he got to the office, and we all gathered around, and he put his fingers on the switches, and he loaded BASIC in with paper tape into the Altair.
I was so nervous. It's not going to work. It worked.
And it came up, and it could do a few little simple things.
And it was amazing when Paul called me up and said the thing had worked the first time. And of course, it was incredibly fast.
And it printed out memory size, and I think Bill said, well, it printed something. And so I said, yeah.
Oh, that was unbelievable. The fact that it really worked was a breakthrough.
Maybe there wouldn't be a Microsoft if the screen hadn't come alive. Who knows? It might all be quite different.
After the demo succeeded, Bill forgot about finishing university. Afraid of missing his chance to dominate the new industry, he joined Allen in what was then the center of world microcomputing research, among the sleazy bars and gas stations of Albuquerque, New Mexico.
And they lived across the street from MITS in the Sundowner Motel. And the prostitutes and the drug dealers are out on the corner. And they were writing BASIC for the Altair computer. And gradually they actually started Microsoft here in Albuquerque. So
we hired some of our high school friends basically to come down and stay with us in our apartment, which became very crowded.
Well, we were pretty young. We started when I was 19, and so he just had a lot of energy.
They worked really hard. They listened to really loud music. I could hardly stand to go in the software room sometimes because the music would be banging off the walls, mostly acid rock.
We'd usually go out, eat pizzas, and then go out and watch action movies.
They would work all night long, and there were days when Bill Gates would be sleeping on the floor in the software lab, and
sometimes would be Bill and these two other guys all, sitting on tables around the apartment with stacks and stacks of paper, writing, converting the BASIC for the 8080.
I still know the source code by heart, and that was a work of love. We just kept tuning and tuning that thing, and so that kind of craftsmanship paid off.
BASIC let the Altair be used for both fun stuff and real work. People attached terminals to the computer and began writing games, word processors, and accounting programs. Most of us didn't notice, but soon there was a thriving industry for enthusiasts. By the end of 1975, dozens of other companies